Our guest for episode 6 is Joel Canacoo. He is a minor league strength and conditioning coach for the Cincinnati Reds. We had a great conversation on baseball athletic development, and we touched on strategies for soccer athletes as well. Be sure to go on YouTube and check out the podcast practical that we did with Joel. It's a separate video that we filmed after the podcast, and Joel took us through some FRC stuff and some hip, ankle, tibial, and shoulder cars that he likes to do with his athletes. Joel and I go back, Joel, 4 or 5 years. We met at Cal Lutheran University together. We were both strength and conditioning coaches there. So Joel, if you want to give just a short intro on who you are and what you do, and I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, Jared, for having me. For me, it's a really cool experience to be here. As Lucas said, I've known him since, I want to say 2015, 2016. And for me, I was born and raised in Ghana. Moved to the United States when I was 13. I lived in New York, and I made my way out to Thousand Oaks and been here since. So went to school at Cal Lutheran, went to East Tennessee for my master's, and I'm completing my second master's at Setanta College in Ireland. But outside of that, really just been at Cal Lutheran and now working in the Cincinnati Reds.
Cool. Talk about that at East Tennessee State. What was your experience there? What did you study there?
It was actually a great experience. It was a blended program. So it was in sports science and coaching education to learn from people like Doc Stone and others like that who are giants in the field of strength and conditioning was great. Dr. Baszler was my immediate supervisor, who I still have the utmost respect for because he taught me a lot of what I know. And Dr. Hugh Lamont, who was at Cal Lutheran, was a big influence in me going to East Tennessee State. So it was a great experience. I got to meet a lot of really good people. People I still rely on to this day, and I've been very, very grateful to just be at the right place at the right time to learn from some really good people.
What was your master's in?
So it was in sports science and coaching education.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then your second degree was what?
So the second degree is in performance science, and so it's looking at more of technology and how we use technology to be able to find that competitive edge within athletes.
So describe your role now, and what do you do kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's I tell people I have the best job in the world. I go in every day with young baseball athletes who are trying to make it big, and we go about trying to train them in strength, speed, conditioning, mobility, just trying to get them to be a well-rounded athlete, to be able to compete at the highest level and compete consistently. If they're on the field, we get more opportunities to be able to get them better at their sport, and we can help them hopefully make it to the big leagues as soon as possible.
What's in that role? What's the what's like your age range that you're working with, and then what's like how many guys are on a minor league team that you're working with?
Yeah, so it varies. I would say our age range right now starts about 16, 17. And we'll go all the way up to guys in their 30s. A typical roster will be about 30, 35 guys. That's pitchers and position players. And so that's what really the roster ends up looking like.
And then on that same question, what is like the training age difference?
Oh man, that's a good question. Yeah. Because the beautiful thing about baseball is it's really becoming an international sport. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of guys from Latin America who training age is pretty much one day when they start with us in our Dominican Academy. And then you have guys in the United States who've been training for a while. And so you can start from a guy who's never seen a weight room before to a guy who is 4 or 5 years into their training age. So it allows for some really creative moments in terms of programming and trying to get guys where they need to be.
So you mentioned your second degree in technology and sports science. How do you use that with the Reds? Do you have limitations there, challenges there? How do you use that kind of on a day-to-day basis if you do at all?
Yeah, it's actually quite useful for us as you continue to find yourselves in the professional setting. Data is everything. Data is everything, and it helps guide us in how we look about trying to develop our guys. we're lucky that we have really, really good sports scientists who help the process in terms of data collection and presenting that data to us as coaches, players, key people in the front office. They do a very good job with that. But having that experience and that degree in sports science helps me a lot to be able to have a better understanding of what's going on, and try and use that understanding to be even much more purposeful in how we collect the data, making sure that the integrity of the data is good, and it can help our athletes get to where we need to be.
So, for example, what type of data do you collect, and what do you guys do, and how do you use it?
We collect the same things that a lot of people are collecting nowadays. Jump testing, sprints. Each organization has their own battery of tests in terms of mobility and performance testing. But for us, jump testing and sprint testing are two tests that we do, and we end up using that to be able to gain a better understanding of strength. Are we moving in the right direction? But also within season, we use it to closely monitor where our guys are at in terms of their performance, and being able to use that to guide conversations with them on, hey, like, this is what I see, what's going on, how can we help you get to where you need to be?
Yeah, and so going back to a little bit what I was saying, taking the technology, taking what you see, and then you get, to the actual weight room, training them, right? So you have this big gap in training age. What are some of the challenges, using the information that you get from the technology side, which I assume would be a lot different from someone that's day one never trained, or a 35-year-old that's trained his whole entire career? What are some challenges when you actually get into the actual training aspect of such a wide range of training age athletes, language barrier, all those type of things that I assume that you go through?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and it's one that when you're in the environment, you don't really think about much, because you're just trying to do what's best for the athlete, right? But one of the things I've always told people is, what I love about the Reds and the way we go about training is we really place a lot of value in the individual, and understanding that each person is on their own journey. And so the data that we end up collecting from movement screens, from performance testing, is really just a snippet of where they are in their journey. And so through that, we end up going in with our programming to try and help that athlete with their limited knowledge of where they are now, to help them get to where they need to be. And so if a guy has a training age of 4 years, we're going to be smart about how we go about it, and not have him do all the rudimentary stuff. The rudimentary stuff is good for him, but now we can go about trap our deadlift. Like, let's throw some VBT on that and use that to be able to guide his performance there. And then with the younger guy who's just in the beginning phases of his journey, let's just get you good at moving. And so those are some of the things that we go through, and that would be, I guess that would be one of the challenges, right? Is when you have a group of 30, 35 guys, you have to be locked in. You have to be locked in understanding that as much as you want to make your life easier and being able to just put them all on the same program, you can do that, but be smart about how you go about loading guys. You be smart about how you go about trying to educate them on how to move within those exercises. And so it's the same thing also, as you said, with the language barrier. You got to be really, really good about how you connect what the exercise the kid is doing to something that they can relate to in their culture and in their language. And early on, that was a big struggle for me. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but it's not good enough to be able to get my points across. And so I had to show with examples. I had to find ways to get better at being able to connect with them. And now, being in that environment, I've gained a better understanding of Spanish. And so I'm able to now put a couple of pieces in with my coaching cues to help them get to where they need to be.
We talked off air a little bit the other day about programming and some of the specifics about how you guys program throughout the season in particular. Can you get into that at all, about programming and kind of the conversation that we had the other day?
Yeah, I think programming is one of those things that if everybody's not on the same page, it's hard to be able to get guys where they need to be at, especially in our setup, right? Because we have the Dominican Academy, and then from the Dominican, rookie ball in Arizona, low A, high A, double A, triple A, and then the big leagues, right? And so our job is to make sure in the minor league system that we're preparing guys to be able to go and compete at the highest level. And so with that, our strength coaches, and under the leadership of our major league strength coach and our minor league coordinator, we go about making sure that we have a very good structure on how we go about training and being able to implement that through the whole system to help us make sure that when guys move from one level to the other, there's no big change in that. Periodization-wise, I think, again, it depends on where the guy is in terms of the league. So, for example, in rookie ball, we have extended spring training. That happens right after spring training. And then we start playing games in June. And then you have everybody else from low A up that starts playing games in April. So periodization-wise, it changes a tad bit, but we tend to try and follow the same type of system of building work capacity, building strength, being able to express that strength in everything they do. And that's really what it comes down to.
What is the – I don't really exactly remember the minor league. What is their game schedule? How many games do you guys play?
Yeah, so it's funny. I had to go back and take a look because every level has different structures of how many games. So pretty much from low A to double A, you play 120 games in the season.
So in that, talking about programming and periodization, I'm in the basketball world.
Yeah.
So how we do things. I'm curious in the baseball world. There's so many games. There's travel. I'm sure the travel in minors isn't as nice as it is in the bigs. How do you balance when guys are getting strength, when they're getting the recovery, sprints? How do you balance kind of that programming periodization, just kind of overall, or how is the baseball see it? Not technically maybe your organization, but just in general, what's the culture around that?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't have too much experience in baseball outside of the college setting until I got to the Reds. And when I got to the Reds, I actually remember in my interview with my boss when he was talking to me, he asked me how I train baseball players, and I said, it's going to be a shock to you, but we got to lift. We got to put some weight on the bar. We got to get strong. We got to go overhead with our movements. We got to sprint. And I said, maybe that might be a shock to people, but I think that baseball players need to be trained like everybody else, and understand that if we have a great level of strength, we're going to be able to withstand the demands of the game. And so that's what I knew, because you look on social media and you see different things on how people train, right? So you start connecting that level of training to everybody else. And then I got into the Reds and I said, oh, these people know what they're doing. Yeah. And they push guys and make sure that we're trying to get after it in that manner.
So what do you start with when you have a guy as a training age of essentially nothing? How do you start with him? What exercises do you do? Is that a challenge? Take me through kind of what you would do with a guy in that situation.
Yeah, I think for us it comes down again to we utilize our movement screens to be able to see the guy. How does he move? And then we have conversations with the athlete, and then from there, it just comes down to, the basic movements that all athletes need to know, right? Squat, push, pull, carry, and hinge. And so we take that as the framework on how we build everything, and we just look into trying to implement exercises that allow us to be able to get there. So if it's a squat, it's a body weight squat to start with. It doesn't need to be anything complex. We just need to groove really good patterns. We got to groove really good patterns for guys to be comfortable in those movements. And then from there we can load it, and then after that they just become the athlete that they've always been. And so it just starts with that, and then single leg movements are really, really good in being able to help us train body control and spatial, the holding themselves in space. And so, we start with that. A squat, single leg squat, good mornings or RDLs, core, addressing the core, addressing the hips. And I think that's one thing that I gained much greater value when I got to the Reds, was the importance of mobility and being able to improve the deficiencies of athletes to help them get into the movements that you want them to get into faster. And so that's really how we go about it. I wish I could say that there's like some fancy way we go about being able to do it, but we just teach the basic movements like everybody else. And we tell the athletes, you need to be great at attacking these movements and doing them with great intent. And from there we can load it, and you'll end up seeing the results of what you do.
What's different in the college setting? Because you were at Cal Lutheran University working with baseball, and you and I actually worked with baseball together there for I think 2 years, and the year before that, you guys actually won the national championship. Was that 2017?
2017, yeah.
What's the difference in the college setting and then in the professional setting?
I always get that question, and I tell people the same thing. From an athlete side of things, nothing really changes much. Guys are just as motivated to be better. And so it starts with that. When you have athletes that are bought into the process of trying to get better, there's not really much that I have to do to get them to where they need to be. I think where the difference comes in is those guys at the professional level have more time because they're not taking classes. Even if some of them are, there's the off season, right? They can plan things accordingly for that. So what they do with their time off the field plays a big role in their development. And that's where we always talk about the big rocks. Sleep, nutrition, hydration. Those things are so important to be able to get those guys where they need to be. I think for me, when I got to the Reds, one of the greatest improvements I saw, it was happening at Cal Lutheran, but to see it happen even more often is a collaboration that happens within every facet of our team. I'm talking about ATCs, sports scientists, but even the coaching staff. My favorite thing is always just being in the dugout with the guys. When I was at Cal Lu, I would sit in the stands. But being in the dugout with our hitting coach, being able to have conversations about what he's seeing as a coach, our pitching coach. Why do we believe that an athlete is not able to find their command on the mound? And then from there, they come into my office and we sit down. We're like, hey, let's talk about athlete A, right? He's having this issue on the mound. He's having issues with internal rotation, being able to get down the mound. What can we do from a strength and conditioning side to help get that better? And then from there, we work on it, and then we're in constant communication with each other. Like, hey, what are you seeing now? With our hitters, I had a great hitting coach last year in Jason Broussard, and he would always come in, and we would literally sit down for 30, 40 minutes and just chat about everything movement-wise and how it connects to hitting. And so he would see something with a guy, and he'd be like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And then we would work together to be able to get that done. And so for me, that's the biggest, change is the amount of collaboration and being able to go to your head coach. And we have daily meetings. We sit down. Here's the plan for today. Here's what guys are doing on the field. And we're able to have these conversations and really hash it out. Make sure we're all on the same page. What's the objective of today? And we go and execute. So that's for me the biggest difference.
I'm sure that helps you because that builds a tremendous amount of trust in you so that they believe in you, and then you guys are all on the same page, that you can really feel like you have ownership in what you do and that you have people that trust you and have your back in what
you want to do with certain guys. I feel like that's probably really, really important.
Yeah,
for you.
I agree, and I think that's for me why I say I have the best job in the world, because people, you guys know as strength coaches, right? Even in the settings that we're in, even in the private sector, there's a disconnect. There ends up being a disconnect sometimes between the coaching staff and what is happening within the weight room, and so to be able to have people who are willing to have conversations, and I'm still learning the game of baseball, but what I do know is how to get guys better in the weight room, and also understand how to manage the stressors that happen in their life, to be able to make sure that they're performing at the highest level all the time. And so being able to speak with a head coach and be like, hey, this guy's going through this stuff, how can we work together? He's looking a little bit tired. The numbers are showing he's looking a little bit tired, and we just see it physically. How can we work together to be able to provide him a little bit more of opportunity to be able to bounce back so he can play the game like the way we want him to play it?
I'm sure there's a decent amount of like high schoolers that will listen to this podcast, and you talk about having conversations with the hitting coach or the head coach about a pitcher or a hitter. Everyone that plays baseball that pitches wants to throw the ball faster. Everyone that hits wants to hit home runs, high batting average. What would be like a couple of things that in those conversations that you've learned maybe from a coach's perspective that you've been able to take to the weight room and maybe alter something that you've done? I don't know, throwing out maybe like med ball throws or something. What are some of the things that you use to help a pitcher, say, or a hitter in order to increase their performance maybe a little bit more specifically than just get strong?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that the power of video is so important. One of the things that I learned over the last few years from our coaches actually was how we can take videos of them in game and be able to tell them. So like a great example you brought up, like med ball with a hitter. A lot of hitters just go through the movements in the weight room with no connection to how it's going to affect their movement on the field. And so being able to take video of them hitting and say, hey, you see how you sit on your back leg and you're transferring away from your back leg into your front leg to then rotate the hips violently? Do the same thing with a med ball, right? Like if we want to hit bombs, we need to learn how to be violent with how we move our body. And so we can take that, and that's my favorite thing with guys is being able to take a video of that. I show it to them, and they're like, oh, yeah. And one of the greatest cues I heard this year from our coordinator, Danny, was he would just tell guys, hit home runs. Just hit home runs. And it's amazing just how that simple cue would change the mechanics of how guys would throw med balls. And then same thing with pitching. We're able to take videos and we're able to show guys like, okay, when you're riding the mound, sit in the back leg, ride the mound down, and it's the same thing we do in the med ball. So we can teach them, with like a step back med ball throw. Okay, when you step back, sit into that leg, find your spot, and then from there be violent about how you attack, the zone. And so those are some of the things that we do. And then from there, even within those same videos, we can show guys, okay, do you see how your hip mobility is deficient in the weight room? Look at how now you're trying to compensate on the mound to get you into the movements that you need to get into. And so we're able to use those things to be able to show them. And then we say, okay, now let's look at how we can go about addressing it. And then when we address it and they start to see those improvements, it's so cool for them when they now start to see themselves and they come back to a video in a few weeks later and they're like, hey, I want you to see this. Look at how I'm now like being able to separate my hip and torso much better. And so that's really one of the ways we're able to get them to connect both sides is by video. It's by video and then from there, like now we can use that video to say, okay, you see how coach was talking to you about this? Let's address it in the weight room by being able to hit home runs. being able to attack the zone like that.
So hip mobility in particular, what would you do in a weight room with a guy who lacks hip mobility? Is it give us some examples there?
I'm a big fan of some of the FRC stuff, functional range conditioning. Hip carts are my go-to for everybody. I think they really do a good job in the athlete being able to discover the ranges of motion that they have. And through that, it's really just a simple exercise that allows them to be able to move through every range of motion that the hip should be able to do. And through that, they just gain better understanding of their body, but also the joints and the hip capsule starts to learn how to move smoother. So that's one of the first things that we do. 90-90 switches are incredible in being able to improve external and internal rotation. That's some really good stuff that we always do with our athletes. We throw them in everything because they help a lot. They help a lot to be able to improve that. And then from there, we attack the glute med with like a pigeon pose or an elevated pigeon pose. And then Pills Rails is another exercise. It's another sequence from functional range conditioning where you start to learn how to so it's like passive and it's called passive and reflexive. So one of the things that we would do is we would put a guy in a half kneeling position, and then they'll rock their hips forward to get a hip flexor stretch, and they'll hold that for the protocol says you should hold it for 2 minutes. So they'll hold that for a little bit, and then from there I tell them, okay, now you're gonna you're gonna think of trying to separate your hip and your stomach away from each other, and we go in levels. So we're like, okay, think of your irradiation, as they call it. Think of how you radiate your body as being a gear in a car. So we go level 1, level 2, and with each level, they're trying to irradiate and really think of pulling their hip out of the hip socket, and by doing that, we're able to really extend and stretch out that muscle. And then from there, they relax a little bit, and then we ask them, okay, now push your knee into the floor and back, and now working on that reflexive part as well, being able to really open up that hip. And guys love that. Every time they come out of it, they feel so good, and we're able to then use that to restore that mobility that they've lost.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing you're saying really is, in the last kind of 2 segments, is like the video creates, like kind of what you said about the coaching staff, is it creates trust. So you have trust within the coaches to have those conversations, build that, take what they're saying and learn from it, be able to put it into the weight room to where the coaches now see the benefits of that. So you build trust there. But you're also talking about building trust with the athletes that drives intent, to where at least a lot of times in the industry, I feel like mobility is looked at like kind of, I don't want to do that. I just want to lift heavy weight. I want to do the fun stuff. But by doing the video and stuff, you kind of get that intent from them. So then you have the trust with the athlete in order to now do some things that may seem unconventional or they've never seen before. They're like, what do you mean, like, separate my, like, the cues that you're using? Now they're like, man, whatever you say, like, I'm going to try to do, at least give it a chance. And then, as strength coaches, we know the benefit of it. So we know that what they're doing is great for them, is going to allow them to perform at a higher level. Have you had any challenges with guys in that buy-in process?
You know it, man. You know it. It's easy to sit here. It's easy for me to sit here and be like, oh yeah, everything is great. No, like at the end of the day, ball players are ball players, right? And I think going back a little bit to when we talk about the difference between college and professional players, the pros, they're so confident in themselves. I call them delusional. Like they can go literally 150 for like 5 games, and they'll still come in and say, I'm the best player there is.
Which is good and bad.
Yeah,
good
right.
To have that confidence, yeah.
Right, but it's what makes them who they are, right? And so with that, imagine now, as we said, training age for some of these guys is very low. They're now in an elite environment, right? They've been considered one of the best, and they're now competing with some of the best. And now you tell them, hey, I really think being able to work out and do mobility work is going to be great for your career long term. They're going to look at you and be like, but I've already been good as I am, right? Like, why do I need to change what's already working? And that's where you make such a great point, Jared. Like, being able to develop really quality relationships with the guys makes a big difference in being able to have them buy into what you're doing. But that's one of the biggest challenges is when things are going great, they don't want to change much, right? And that's where you're trying to then win them back and say, okay, it's going well, but we still have room to be better. And that's really one of the biggest things. And then also, like, the outside influences. You have parents, you have agents, you have other people who are like, oh, don't do this, don't do this, because we don't want you to get hurt. We want you to be able to play. In terms of, like,
specific exercises?
Well, I just not really specific exercises, but like just overall, just like, you're already good as it is. Why do we need to try and reinvent the wheel? And so you have to, like, build that connection with those guys and say, hey, like, I have your best interest at heart in making you get to where you need to be. So those are some of the real challenges that you end up facing there.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I don't want to talk down on any ball players, but you are in the minors. Like, there is a big step for you to get to, It's like you still aren't perfect. You're still, like, I would imagine that's kind of how I would take it. Me personally, I'd be like, I know you're doing great, but, like, isn't your bigger goal, like, to be the majors? Like, you still are steps below what your probably ultimate goal is.
Absolutely.
To that point about, there's this whole conversation about sport specificity. So how do you manage that in terms of, hey, this med ball throw, you need to connect it to how you hit, a baseball, because they're not one and the same. So how do you manage that? Sometimes, I think, especially like in golf and baseball and tennis, people try to get really, really, really quote unquote sport specific, which isn't necessarily always the best thing, because the weight room is general in nature for a reason, GPP as opposed to SPP, general physical preparation and then special physical preparation. So how do you kind of manage that line? Because sometimes me training the athletes that I do need to use the language of the sport and the language that the coach uses in the sport to make connections. But I also understand that the weight room is general in nature and we're building general qualities. So how do you kind of manage that, or could you just speak to that in general?
Yeah, no, I think, it's such a good question. And that's where the trust of and the collaboration between all departments plays such a huge role. One of the things that I've valued is having the opportunity to be able to listen to what our hitting philosophy is, what our pitching philosophy is, and being able to take those cues of how they're trying to get guys to do things on the field and then bring it into the weight room.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's massive, right? And I think that's where right, we talk about sport specificity, right? And we've always said, like, just play your sport. And that's great, but can we start thinking in a different manner of sport specificity as being how we use cues to help with general exercises that are being done in the weight room?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Right? Because then when you do that, at the end of the day, right, these kids just want to play ball, right? And so when you end up trying to dissociate both areas, it's not fun for them. But if I can go in and tell them, hey, hit a home run with a med ball.
Yeah.
And that they can do because, this it's what they want to do all the time.
Yeah.
And so it brings the sport back into the weight room, but does not take the weight room and how we go about developing the holistic athlete away from the field. And I think that's where really we have to start looking at it in a different manner. And that starts by us explaining to the athlete in cues like that, being able to show them. So, like, for example, I've been lucky enough to come in here and work with some of the athletes in here, and Matar, is a soccer player, and I remember he was jumping, and he's just going up with no great intent, just jumping to jump. And when all of a sudden you tell him, hey, push the floor away from you and go up for that header, changes things a little bit, right? And
changes intent.
It changes intent, right? Because now all of a sudden, when he's done with that, I can go to him and say, hey, if you learn how to drive yourself away from the floor and win every header, imagine how much easier it is when you're playing the game, right? We talk about sprinting. If you want to get faster, sprint. Why don't we do the same thing with how we use our cues to bring the athlete into driving with great intent so that when they get on the field, there is no drop-off in how they do it. That's why we train. We train for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why we train is to make sure that we improve the ability to express themselves with greater intent.
I think that's huge, cueing in the language of the sport. That's a big takeaway, I think, for me, because every sport has a different language, you know? And if you can use that language in how you train them in the weight room or on the field in terms of change of direction or agility or speed, but particularly in the weight room, that, I think, can make a big difference in intent and buy-in, you know, from the athletes. So I think that's huge. And if you're training athletes from different sports, I think it's important to take the time to learn what the language is and learn how they're coached, because I think that can build buy-in too. Jared, what are some things as far as basketball that you can use in the weight room to help build that intent that you've experienced?
I mean, it's similar to what he's saying about jumping. You know, simple things is like going up for a dunk.
Yeah.
There's certain core movements we do where we have like a hip lock. It's, you know, or that kind of idea. It's where one leg's up into hip flexion, one leg solid. It's, you know, that's like a layup takeoff. You know, bodying people in the post, different foundational, you know, just bracing movements, things like that. I mean, I think the biggest thing with that is, like, at least when I was in school getting my degree, like, a lot of the talk was like strength coach cues. Yeah. Like, how do you cue a squat, right? You know, hips back, this, whatever the cue was. And I think in our setting, private sector, team of 30 people, like, sometimes you don't have the time to use like a strength coach cue or like come up with some great cues, which there are some great out there that you could use. But sometimes just saying that, like, hey, you jump off the ground like you're going up for a header, jump off the ground like you're going up for a dunk, and guys will get that instantaneously. Versus trying to explain to them like why we need to jump with intent. It's just like you instantly get that intent. And I think that's just kind of, you know, I don't use as many like cues, I guess. It's more like, for me, and what I do is a lot of times we'll go through a set, say, and I'll see my athlete, maybe the intent's not there. I'll just have a conversation about like a game situation and that kind of situation, and then all of a sudden the intent just comes because you're relating to their sport. And like you said, most athletes just want to play their sport, and especially as you get higher. I'm with the NBA, MLB. It's like they just want to play their sport. Like, that's what they love to do. That's what they've done their entire life. So sometimes this side's harder, and it's just trying to bring those two together is super important.
Yeah. So if we were to pivot a little bit, Coach, I know that you're big into the soccer world, and you've had a lot of experience coaching and playing even in soccer. What do you do with that in soccer, and kind of how do you just generally, you know, develop soccer athletes to build athleticism and become a better player?
Man, that's a great question, and yeah, you're right. Soccer is my first love. Growing up in Ghana, soccer is a religion. I always tell people that you can tell when you're in an African country, especially like Ghana, and the World Cup is going on, and the president is on TV asking people to pray. Like, that's how much the game means to us. And so I've always enjoyed the game, and coming back home, you know, in the off season, I end up taking some time to be able to coach the game of soccer. And when it comes to the development of soccer athletes, it's a very interesting framework in which I go about training athletes in that manner. I take everything that we do in the weight room and try and make them great movers. In the game of soccer, we've ended up moving into this realm of trying to always be great on the ball. But because of that, we've lost our ability to be able to do the really small things that need to be successful off the ball. So one of the big things that, if you ever come to a session that I run, is we work a lot on perception. You know, I took that from basketball, honestly. We work on perception. We make sure that the athlete is able to understand where they are in space and where they need to go next. So we talk about it like as playing in the future. When we are on the field, we always need to make sure that our body shape has us being able to see the present, where the ball is, and the future. And so we use strength and conditioning to be able to help build the foundation of how we go about developing the technical aspects of the game. So when it comes to even like passing, we vary where the ball comes from. It's not just a straight line of you facing me. We include movement. So check out, check in, learn how to go into a drop step to be able to then come back into the ball. And with that, also use your senses and your eyes to be able to perceive what's happening around you and then make a better decision from that. And I think that's where within the realm of soccer right now, we lose that aspect of development. We've become so focused on the ball that every player now, when they have the ball, just looks down. They never look at what's in front of them, and they are finding it even harder now to be able to identify situations in front of them and how to be able to play out of those situations. So within the development of soccer, that's for me the biggest thing. We take the ball, we make it very valuable, but we also make sure that we value perception as the greatest factor of the ability to be successful.
And Jared, you could talk to this too, but sports specialization, I'm sure, kind of plays into that a little bit, and how specialized it's getting and how early it's getting with especially club, even, here in California, and how crazy really it is, the schedule of club and youth soccer in the United States, but especially here in California. Do you think that plays a role into kind of what you're speaking about? Yeah,
it plays a massive role in it. I and Jared can maybe even attest to this too, like youth soccer players damn near play or have the same travel schedule as professional players right now. They're on the road so much, within practices, within games out of state, the number of tournaments and competitive games that they have to play, it's taken away from opportunities to be able to develop. And as a soccer coach myself, you end up getting caught in the wins-loss records, because as a coach you're judged on that. So I can have a long-term vision of being able to develop a player to be competent on the ball, have great cognition and great character, and you place that as the foundation of your system, and then all of a sudden, a parent or a player is just like, we're not winning, right? And it starts to create a bad culture. So coaches have had to now sacrifice some of that to be able to just win so that they can keep their process going. But with that, with how many games we're not playing, kids find it difficult to just sacrifice, a couple of hours to just go and train on their own and also train in the weight room. That's for me the biggest downfall of the way the setup is in the United States. We don't give kids time to train on their own, and especially in the weight room. So you try and push a kid to come in and work out twice a week. You're like, oh, I'm going to be sore. I'm not going to be able to play my best. Then I'm going to be sitting on the bench. And it's like, okay, I understand that, but long term, where do we want to be? Right, and that's why I always try and explain to kids, the kid with a bigger work engine who can be a Ferrari all the time is going to end up being on the field more often than not, and we have to invest our time into doing that.
And the problem is kids are now underdeveloped. They're so underdeveloped. Yeah. We talked the other day about a group of even ECNL soccer girls who are playing at a high level. You ask them to sprint 10 yards and decelerate on the line. You said, half the girls are running through the line. They don't even know how to decelerate because they're not developing that athleticism, that ability to control their body, because they're skilled, but they're underdeveloped because they don't have time to develop, as an athlete. With sports specialization early on, they're not developing the different movement patterns and different muscle groups. And so talk to that a little bit. And Jared, if you want to add to that, but people I think athletes, especially soccer, are underdeveloped.
Yeah, I can start on that. It's becoming a big problem. It's becoming a big problem because we have overemphasized the game, and so with that, you look at even moments within practice where we can try and get ourselves better. And for me, that's the warm-up. The warm-up is not good enough anymore. And I tell my girls all the time, I'm coaching at a high school right now, and I always tell them, I'm like, look, like our warm-up has to be money. It's got to be locked in, because that's one of the first moments of practice where we can get ourselves better. And one of the things that I've always valued of the warm-up is, if you think about what we just talked about, how many games they end up playing and practices they end up having, that's damn near close to 2,000 to 5,000 hours over the span of a year, 2 years, that they can work on deficiencies to be able to get themselves even closer to the athleticism we're talking about. So, for example, like hip mobility during the warm-up, kids nowadays are sitting more than in years past. They're developing tight hip flexors, and so how about we use the warm-up to be able to address some of those deficiencies? Speed. Everybody wants to get fast, but are we utilizing a little bit of, literally it takes 5 minutes within the warm-up to be able to microdose a little bit of speed in there, and you do that 2 to 4 times a week over the span of a year, you're going to get faster. But that's something right now that gets lost. You talked about the deceleration. I think that's one of the areas that in soccer right now we don't teach anymore, and it shows when you look at the quality of defenders that are now in the game of soccer. At the youth level and moving up. If you're able to decelerate and control yourself in space, you can make a whole lot of money when you end up already to be drafted, because you're a better athlete than most people. And finding quality defenders right now is so hard because we don't take the time to be able to develop some of these key attributes that are needed. And, Jared, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the first question, I know you're a high school coach, but when I used to work in the club sector, I thought my biggest thing to a lot of my girls that I worked with was don't play high school soccer. Because the issue there is that most of the girls want to play club, because that's where you get exposure. That's where you get to go play college. But like what you're saying is that you go from an ECNL season, which is pretty much like 8 months-ish with a couple breaks here and there, and then you get your 3 or 4 month high school break. They're playing – I've never actually looked at how many games they've played, which I should have, but like they're playing an enormous amount of games. And then you have showcases where you're playing 2, 3, 4 games in a couple days, to where you're saying is they never actually have a break. And we talked about this before. They never actually have a break to focus on themselves, to recover, to relax, to reset their mind. It's just kind of go, go, go. And, a lot of my girls, I said don't play high school soccer, but a lot of them, that's like which they say to me is like that's their fun time to play soccer, right? There's not as much stress. There's not as much like pressure, all that kind of stuff. And it's hard to tell a high school kid to do that, but like you said, that's one of the issues I think in how USA is set up. And then like the interesting part is that Southern California is like a hot spot for soccer. Some of the best soccer players that you see on the national stage come right here out of Southern California. So obviously there's some people coming out of here and they're doing the right things. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some issues that need to be addressed. All the things that you've said are obviously things that need to be addressed. How do we address them? I think the biggest thing you said, which should be taken away, is the warm-up. Like, you go to any warm-up, the coaches are usually talking, and they're doing the same warm-up we did in, like, 5th grade PE.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty, there's no intent behind it. Right. There's no real rhyme or reason. It's 20 minutes wasted of practice. And most of the girls aren't even warmed up. It takes them another 20 minutes to get warmed up once practice starts. Now you only got an hour 20 of practice. Now coaches are mad because the practice isn't there, and then all of a sudden now they're running just like go run the line for 2 minutes. It's like that's just another waste of time. So yeah, I mean the way they structure things, it's trying to get better. I've seen the move for it when USA DA, I think it was called, took over. They tried to have the USA, format of like what the U.S. national team does and try to bring that down to the clubs, but it's just hard. I mean, we talked about it before, so I won't get too much into it. It's hard to change the philosophy of a coach, right? And these coaches have been doing that forever. So if you don't give it to someone like us that actually understands what they're talking about, a coach, the first thing they're going to do is throw it away and just do what they're doing. And that's what I see is just keeps happening, at least in where I've seen it. I'm not saying everywhere. Obviously, there's places that are probably doing it a lot better. But when we see it and I talk to athletes, it seems to be like, what do you do for warm-up? It's the same thing. Quad, knee hug, couple karaoke's, couple jogs, talking to friends, and all of a sudden, yeah, we're in practice.
So what would you do in a warm-up? What would you recommend to do in a warm-up? Like if you were to run a warm-up, what would you do?
First is I think what you were touching on is make the warm-up intentful and educate the athlete on the importance of the warm-up. Because the first thing you see wrong is that girls or guys will just talk the whole warm-up, right? So how are you doing the movement and creating movement efficiency and skill when you're just talking and messing around? So for example, like a classic one is like a knee hug, and what I would do is I would do a knee hug, add into a single leg RDL, right? So you do a knee hug, single leg RDL. Now, that's just body weight, but that's also proprioception, that's single leg stability. Now, getting them to do that intentful takes a lot longer than them just to be able to do it right. Because how do you do a knee hug and do a single leg RDL when you're talking to your friend and you're falling over and you can't do anything, right? So taking the basic like dynamic stretches that pretty much everybody does, now how do you do those intentfully and how do you do them right? I mean, how many times have you seen people do lateral hip shifts, groin stretch?
Oh, yeah, that's the worst.
Just like, and then, it's like, no, let's get a lateral lunge.
Yeah.
Like, let's get a lateral lunge on both sides, move the hips through a low center of gravity, and then let's go from there. A lunge with like an overhead reach, you're getting a lunge. Then I'd go into, the more parts, like the dynamic part, like, shuffles, but can we make those intentful? Can we progress those? Can we go high shuffle down and back? Can we go a low shuffle down and back? Now can we get some reactive, like go? A shuffle into a sprint, a shuffle out, shuffle back into a sprint. So now you're getting some change of direction in the warm-up, some karaoke to move the hips, some backpedaling into sprints. And then what I would do is I'd finish with like 3, 4, 5, 10, 20-yard sprints. And those are intentful and those are fast. Like Joel was saying, is like that's our micro-dose speed session. How many times do girls practice in a week in the club? 3 usually, minimum. That's 9 sprints in a week at minimum. If they're not doing anything else, you at least got 9 high-effort, intentful sprints, which ideally will maybe they don't get faster, but they maintain with where they're at. They're not slower at the end of the season.
Right. Yeah, I think the microdosing of sprints is key because you add the intent and the quality, which you're not always getting in a regular practice. Just because you're running in practice doesn't mean you're sprinting. Sprinting is unique, and the neuromuscular demands of sprinting are unique such that you have to do it if you want to get faster. Meaning, like, if you're in practice, you're not always getting high intent sprints. And a lot of it is long, slow running, especially conditioning at the end of a practice. That's not sprinting. That's not speed work. So adding that to the warm-up, I think, is a great idea, and it's like really, really necessary for athletes to develop movement quality and to develop speed. So, Coach, you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Jared brought up some great points, and one of the things that I learned, I had the privilege of going to Spain in 2019 to be able to do some coaching education out there, and it was really cool to watch how they try and get intent out of those athletes right away, and it's something that I brought back. And so what they do is they take a rondo, right? So a rondo is like a keep away game, and everybody has their own thoughts on rondos. If you look at rondos from a movement aspect, it's phenomenal. It's great because you get the opportunity to be able to start immediately working on change of direction.
So describe that. I'm not familiar with that.
So
it'd be like spike ball.
Yeah, like spike ball.
In a sense.
It's pretty much like spike ball, right? So for example, one that we run, at the high school I work with is we change it up, but like we start off with 3v1, so 3 people on the outside, 2 people in the middle, and we purposefully create a square. So there's an open space where somebody always has to fill that space. So we're trying to create triangles, and the person in the middle is trying to win the ball, right? So they have to learn how to take off, slow down, take off, slow down, right? And so we do that for about 3 minutes. Then we go into what Jared said, right? Knee hug into an RDL, overhead reach, right? Some of these things to be able to start improving the flexibility and mobility of the athlete. Then we go back into the rondo again. So now we're trying to get them not just physically but mentally to start showing the intent that we're trying to get them to be at. And then from there, we go into the dynamic, what Jared talked about already, right? The side shuffles, the change of direction. And then we go one more time into the rondo. And then we finish off with, they call it dual force. So like learning how to overcome inertia of somebody else. So you partner up, you sit low, you push against each other, you pull against each other. You're starting to learn how to receive forces in different aspects. And then we also add in those sprints. So with that, you've attacked change of direction, you've attacked mobility, you've attacked speed, and mentally, they can't fall asleep. They got to be locked in to be able to move through and get themselves really primed so that the session is then valuable. We don't take, as Jared said, another 20 minutes because they're not warmed up to now finally get ourselves there. As a coach, I'll lose myself, and then it's not going to be good on the kids. So that's how we go about it. And I think Jared brought us some really, really great points about how to try and make that warm up much more impactful.
I feel like after warm up, you should be like lathered, like sweating, warm. Like the typical definition of a warm up is like raised body temperature, and like a lot of the warm ups I do, like they're not warm at all. And then like what you're saying is like that's a great idea, is adding that in, because again, it's going back to what we talked about even with the baseball world, is you're adding an intent instantly, because you're like, hey, give me 5 minutes of my warm up that I know is important, and then you get soccer, and then give me 5 more minutes of my warm up, and that what you explain, I'm sure takes 20 minutes. Yeah, it's not long, but you get intent. They're probably tired after, and then now okay, go get water, come back, and now we're ready for practice, and that's. You don't see that.
And essentially all that is you're manipulating the constraints for the desired outcome as the coach. Yeah. Which is just good coaching, and particularly in strength and conditioning. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. We manipulate the environment or the task to get the intent or the outcome that we want. I think switching gears a little bit as far as speed for soccer, what would you do as a strength coach for an athlete, or maybe a high school athlete is listening to this? How can they get faster?
Man, that's what everybody's on right now, right? You talk to a coach, and they always they want athletes who are just fast. But to be able to do that, I think it starts with just running fast. It starts with just running fast, and one of the things I always tell my girls and my athletes that I work with in soccer is if speed is that important to you, don't show up to practice right at 6:30. Show up at 6:15. Get in there, get some basic plyometrics in, right? You can start with your A marches, your A skips, and then from there, run 2 to 3 15-yard sprints, right? Just get yourself moving fast as often as possible. If you can do that, you're going to find yourself being much better and much faster. And so that's how it starts. I think as you go into a team setting, being able to implement some of those things we just talked about, and then from there, creating competition. Create competition as much as you can in speed work, in order to drive that intent. And then one of the things that I think gets lost, especially within soccer, and it shows up in the way we play as well, is we always run in straight lines, right? And so we're asking an athlete to now run on an angle, and they don't know what that's supposed to feel like. So using curvilinear sprints, S runs, and being able to just change the dynamic of how they run. So, and again, I tell people that I'm a thief. I like to steal from everywhere. And so like in basketball, even football, they have the route tree, right? And so work on route trees. Jog to a cone, take a hard step, and then just sprint at a 45-degree angle, Learn how to make those types of runs so that when you get into the game, it's not new to you. It really just comes down to just keep running as fast as possible in different angles to be able to get yourself prepared to do that in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's done intentfully is like the biggest thing, which I think has to be changed. Because a lot of times when you watch the injury world of women's soccer, unfortunately, it's like the ACL. Mm-hmm. And what you just explained is like a route tree. A lot of soccer is walking or a light jog, and then you got to explode and go. And the more prepared you could be for that is obviously is high value. Now, a lot of times you see these ACL injuries are from that walk, and then all of a sudden, I got to go, boom, and then the girl just falls on the ground. And almost, if we're watching the game, you're like, it just happened. And so, can you touch on a little bit on maybe just like the ACL world and your thoughts on, what are some things we could do better? Maybe if you have any thoughts on why it's such a big thing, maybe just touch on that a little bit.
Man, how much time do we got? How much time do we got? Because it's the epidemic that continues to hit that sport, right? And I'll go into two things. I could talk about this all day. This is an area I'm very passionate about. I'll go into two things, and we'll go from there. For me, the first one is what you said, which is the varying exposures to accelerating and decelerating. As I said, if you look at the quality of defenders that we have, it is a connection to why you see some of the ACLs that we're seeing. Female athletes don't do a good job in decelerating. We don't spend enough time teaching it, and even as a coach right now, it goes back to a lot of the things that we talked about earlier. If you look at the way soccer is played in the United States, we base everything on win-loss records. How do you win games? You got to score more goals than the other team. So what do we spend most of our time as soccer coaches doing? Attacking the goal. That's what we do. We work on attacking the goal. But because of that, we don't teach people how to decelerate anymore, how to defend. So I ask players all the time, how many of you do 1v1? Not a lot of them do it. And if they do it, it's what Jared has been saying. There's no great intent on taking pride in defending anymore. So if you think about that, and you think about the fact that we're not spending enough time doing that, how are we going to get better at decelerating, right? And that issue, it plays such a pivotal role when they get into the game, and they have, as you said, I tell my kids all the time, where you're running, you don't know how to perceive the distance between you and the player, so you don't know how to slow down. They knock the ball around you, and you're like, I got to get back. So now you're left in a disadvantageous position. You don't know how to decelerate, and all of a sudden, I'm going to stay high and try and turn out of there to go back. You're going to leave yourself vulnerable for these things. And so that, for me, that's one of the big ones. We just don't take enough time to try and develop the aspect of deceleration. And then also with that, because we don't lift, we don't know how to decelerate our body. If you're working out, you're squatting, there's a natural progression of being able to decelerate. But because we don't take the time to be able to strength train, we're in no control of our body, and that's leaving us vulnerable. And for me, the second one comes down to it comes down to an area of conversation we never want to talk about. It starts with the big rocks: sleep, nutrition, hydration. The number of kids I always hear talk about, I'm working hard, I'm doing all the right things, I'm training, I'm lifting, and then I ask them, okay, but how many hours of sleep are you getting? And I'm getting 4. How much water are you drinking? Can't even tell you. How's your eating? You telling me that you're having Taco Bell 3 out of the 4 days of the week, it's not conducive to what an elite athlete is trying to do. And so that plays a big role. we're working these kids, and they're on their part as well. They're not taking care of the small things that they need to do to get better. And I always tell athletes all the time, take care of yourself, take care of your bodies. Do the right thing so we can continue to get better. And it starts with those 3 blocks. In the female game, those 3 blocks play a pivotal role too when you consider the thing nobody wants to talk about, menstruation. It plays such a pivotal role in the ability to be able to handle workload. So if you look at menstruation, there's really 2 phases, right? There's the first phase when you've lost blood. There's a decrease in hormones. So this is the perfect time where you can do a lot of high intense work and really get after it. On the second half, you're starting to see a significant spike in estrogen, other hormones. And it's at that point where you need nutritional factors, hydration, to be able to help your body be able to bounce back. And that's the part that if we don't like talking about because it's kind of taboo, right? And also there's not been a lot of research up until really I took a look up until maybe starting in 2015, 2016. That's when some of the early research started to come on female athletes and the aspect of menstruation. And so when you consider that, it comes down to educating these kids on the fact that, like, what's happening to you is natural. What needs to happen after that, though, is we need to be able to make sure we do the right things outside of the field to make sure that you're getting yourself where you need to be. And again, it can get really complex because look at our generation now, right? Look at what social media has done to us. Girls want to look like a model, right, and play the game of soccer. And it's like, it's hard because it's creating these body image issues where girls are afraid to eat, And so, like, when you're in the latter phase of that menstruation cycle, you need to eat more. You need to provide yourself with much more nutrients. Your iron levels are down. You're in a state of dehydration. And if there's anything that I've learned from being in baseball, is how much hydration plays a role in peak performance. I can't tell you how many guys, literally, when they get hurt, my first thing is go do, we have this refractometer where guys would take a sample of their urine and be able to test their hydration status. And almost all the time, it's severely dehydrated. Hydration is such a big part in being able to keep the body moving, and it gets lost. So if you think about female athletes, and there's a natural dehydration that comes from this later phase in the menstruation cycle, they're not hydrating, they're not eating, they're not recovering, and we're asking them to work still as hard as they can. It leaves them vulnerable for some of these injuries. And so, as I said, I can get deep into it, but those are 2 big things. I would love to hear what you guys think about that.
No, I mean, I think they're great. I mean, I think there's things. I keep saying this in every one we've done, but one of the reasons why we started this podcast was to educate people on, some of the simpler things that they could do today. Because I think a lot of times people try to find these complex things that, the next big technology thing or whatever. But like you said, if you're not doing the basic things that you could do today, there's no money involved. There's nothing. It's just things that you can do to help you become a better athlete and educate, the athletes. I think there are a lot of younger kids that are not younger kids, but like high school, college athletes that will watch this, and they could just get their own education. And the more we educate athletes on these things, the more responsibility they will take to then maybe have a conversation with their parent and say, hey, like, can we do this different or whatever it might be. It's just educating them on, the importance of sleep, hydration, nutrition, proper training, and just those things. I think is just a massive thing.
Yeah, as far as in the weight room, you touched on it a little bit, but because they don't have the time or the team isn't providing the time, they've got to do it on their own. So female athletes, any high school soccer athlete, they need to get in the weight room once or twice a week. Doesn't mean you need to become a bodybuilder and train 2 hours a day every day. That's not realistic anyway, and that's not going to help you. But if they can learn how to squat, lunge, single leg squat, Nordic hamstring curl, RDL, and do some mobility work for their hips and strength of their hips, that's going to go a long way. It doesn't take that much, but learning those basic things, particularly strengthening the hamstrings, is going to go a long way. So if that's a takeaway, if the high school athlete is listening to this, learn how to train your hamstrings and learn how to get in the weight room once or twice a week. That's going to go a long way. So, and oftentimes you have to do it on your own. So providing resources, like you said, that's why we started the podcast, providing the resources and the knowledge and the information, the education to do those things, I think it's really important. So,
yeah, I mean, like, and on that is like, you might not have time to come to a trainer. You might not have time to, or maybe your family doesn't have the financials to hire a trainer, you know, but ideally now with like everything out there is that they could listen to this. And like you just said, I think you named like 6 exercises.
Right.
That if a high school athlete just takes those 6 and doesn't body weight from a freshman in high school and just progressively overloads them for 4 years,
yeah,
they're going to be super strong, and their risk of injury is going to decrease if they're doing the 3 other blocks. Now, you can't obviously say eliminate injury, but their risk of injury is going to decrease massively by just doing those 6 movements. Like, there's nothing special outside of that, and that's the simplicity of it. Is just finding something that you could do and progressively overload it and get stronger globally, and just try to stick with it as long as you can. Like you said, 1 to twice a week, progressively overload it, and you'll be much better off.
And doing that consistently and not taking weeks or months of not doing it, and then you injure while you get it. Well, I was working out, I was doing all this stuff. Well, no, you haven't. You haven't trained in 3 months. So doing it consistently, I think, is really important. You can't just do it in July and December and train and lift weights or squat or do whatever you're going to do, and then okay, what do you do from January to May? You don't do anything, and you wonder why you're getting injured. It's so simple, but yeah, that's a good point. I think the education on doing it and doing it consistently, like you said, if you just start your freshman year, ideally before that, and you just slowly, progressively do that, you're going to be really strong, and you're going to be a better athlete. You're not going to be underdeveloped. You're going to learn how to decelerate because, squatting and single leg squatting and RDLs, it's training eccentrically. So you're going to train your body to learn how to decelerate and to learn how to stop and go. And you're going to be a better athlete doing that too. So to us, it's a no-brainer, but I think educating the athlete and the parent is the hardest part.
Yeah, and that's like not to cut you off, but it goes back to like what you said about your baseball situation. Like, imagine your 16-year-olds that come over for you, and from the age of 14, so just 2 years, imagine if they squatted, lunged, hinged, push-ups, and pull-ups 3 times a week for 2 years straight. How much easier your job would be, and how it would be so much easier than to progress or do the fun stuff that they always see. But you're not going to take that athlete and show them a workout that some famous baseball player they see on Instagram doing. Like, I want to do this. You're like, you can't squat, hinge. It's like if you just do the basics really, really well, you're going to set yourself up for success. And that's why I try to tell athletes is, that financially maybe can't do it or they don't have the time. Everybody has time to go to 24-hour fitness or even at your house and just try to find a way to do those basic things really well.
And I couldn't agree more. And that's why every time people ask me, how do you guys train? They're expecting this like really, special answer of, we're using this, and I just tell them, we just do the simple things really, really well. That's all we need to do is we just do the simple things really, really well. And to come back and touch on what you both have said, I think if there's any high school athlete listening to this, one of the limiting factors people have when they start training is soreness. They're afraid of soreness, right? And they end up quitting too early within that training process. And it's okay to be sore because, in fact, you end up finding within yourself a new sense of grit. You learn to fight through some of these, situations that is not perfect. And that's one of the things that I end up seeing with a lot of high school athletes, especially in soccer, and speaking with their parents, is they always mention 2 things. I don't want my kid to get injured, which you both know, right? We can't predict that. Like, there's no way we can avoid injuries. It's going to happen at some point. Now, if you're strength training and you're doing the right things to be able to build your body up, you can bounce back quicker. And I think that's something that people have to start understanding is luck plays a role in injuries. Some people are lucky and they never get injured, and that's fantastic. But some of us, we get injured. But if you have had a good level of training to begin with, you're going to be able to bounce back quicker, right? And so that's one of the first things. And then everybody always says, "Well, I'm sore, so I can't play my best." Well, one of the first things I ever heard from a strength coach with the Reds was, perfect only happens in games. It only happens in video games. You can only be perfect in video games, where every game you can come out and be at energy level 100 all the time.
Right.
You know, you play 120 games in baseball, you're not always going to feel great. And I will never forget, I had a chance of working with a big leaguer, and I talked with him. I said, "Hey, how you feeling today?" He's like, "Same as yesterday, broken and ready to go." You know, and it's one of those things where for a high school athlete, it's important to understand that you're not going to feel 100% all the time. But what you do with 70%, 60%, 80% will lead you to being a better athlete when you are at 100. And so it's important to understand that when you start strength training, you're going to be sore. It's okay. But with that, you're also going to learn how to be a smarter player, because maybe that run you used to do all the time, you can't do it because you're just hurting a little bit. But can I be smarter about how I now position myself, how I now make the next pass? You value a lot more things when everything is not perfect.
And knowing you're not always going to be sore every time you strength train. That's
Exactly.
important. Especially the more consistently you do it. Most of the time you're not going to be sore. Especially if you're training the right way with the right volume and intensity and exercise selection. You're not always going to be sore. It's kind of getting past the initial part of it, especially if you're a beginner, and understanding that if I do this consistently, I'm not always going to be sore. So you may be able to train the day before a game and be fine and be better for it. You know, and that's just hard to educate people on that unless they're in it and doing it and trusting you as their coach, as their trainer, you know? So I think just educating on that can be important as well.
That's huge. That's what I was going to say. Like, if you take a beginning person and you have them do squat, lunge, hinge, push, pull up, all body weight, they're going to be sore.
Right.
And a lot of people, you know, what you're saying is they're like, I can't do this. They give it 1 week. And you get past like those first, let's say, 4 weeks, and now all of a sudden you're moving some weight. You might be sore again, but it starts to get incremental, where it's like you do a hard workout, you're sore for 24 hours, and the next day you're good. And I think that's a huge point, because that's like a lot of people, like, they don't want to be sore. It's like, well, you got to get through that first part. And like you were saying, a lot of people give it that chance, or they come and train with you or someone like myself for 4 weeks, and they're just like, I'm too sore, I can't come in anymore. It's, you know, you got to get through that, and let's just build some consistency where you aren't sore, like every single day. That won't happen anymore. Right.
Well, Joel, thanks so much for coming on and taking the time. I thought that was a great discussion. We definitely got to do it again.
No, thank you guys, and again, I'm just blessed to be here. Glad we could, get together and chat. It was a lot of fun.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you.